World. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. We bring you greetings today from Mooresville, North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States of America. And on this show, we talk about global affairs, an increasingly turbulent world politically, economically, a war in Ukraine, an economy that's still in a tough spot, and of course, the elections of 2024, which seem far away, but are just around the corner in the United States for the presidency of the United States, U.S. Congress, Senate, and local races. With that being said, today is our July 4th edition. I'm not sure we're going to be on tomorrow, so I won't want to open up my monologue. And before I do, we pray for Baltimore, massive shootings. This week, we will be talking about the Supreme Court decisions, student loan forgiveness, affirmative action being struck down, and a case in which affects North Carolina that rejected the independent state legislative theory, so states will not have unblanched, unhinged power of determining federal election maps. But with that being said, today I want to spend a few minutes with you on July 4th. This is a big day and a big week for the United States of America, our birthday. It was 1776 when we adopted our Declaration of Independence and began implementing the piece of paper that we all abide by, our rights as American citizens, the United States Constitution. Now, for those of you listening, it was a revolutionary concept at the time. The fact that your status in society, your rights, were not dependent on your land owning class or how much wealth you had, but was dependent on just the fact that you were created equal, that you had these rights derived from God and the consent of the governed. Now, of course, as we look back now, we realize that no union was perfect. The founders were not perfect people. They owned slaves. They did the best they could, and they decided to kick slavery down the road for another 100 years until we fought a civil war. But it is an amazing concept. This Republic of the United States of America has worked quite well for over 200 years. The executive branch, the judicial branch, and the congressional and legislative branches have worked hard and worked together to make sure there are checks and balances. And our democracy has been an inspiration to millions around the world who still come and immigrate to America to create lives for themselves, like my own parents and many people who live in Mooresville in the Triangle, who left everything they knew and loved to come to an America, land of the free and home of the brave. I call it the American project, that you can come from any faraway place. You can live up to your potential and still achieve your dreams. This is democracy at its best. And we can criticize our country all we want, but there's no country where the press has the ability to speak whatever they want to write. A man can actually burn a flag in front of someone who spent their life defending the flag and defending freedom. That is our right as Americans, to agree to disagree and not be put in prison because of it. At the end of the day, I could go on and on about how great America is, but I want to end with those famous words from our Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, in order to form a more perfect union. I truly believe the founders of America realized that our nation was not perfect at the time of its founding. Our democracy evolves with the times that we are in. There are people today on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, who believe that their philosophies of government are right. We have racism. We have things that are being said about LGBTQ and other folks out there. But we as Americans can do our part to make our union more perfect. And part of that is to listen to each other, to respect each other, to understand that we're the United States of America, not the divided States of America, and that we're going to be okay. Democracy is not on decline, in my opinion. I think it's being challenged. But we often talk about innovation on this show. I think it's fair to say one of the greatest innovations that ever existed in the history of mankind was our republic, the United States of America, the world's oldest democracy. Perhaps we can use this show to talk more about what we can do to make our union work. Join me in welcoming our guest today, and join me in wishing our country, the United States of America, a happy birthday. I'll close with my final thought of the day. I've been going to Washington quite a bit, and every time I run and walk Lincoln Memorial, I run there, about a 6 mile run from my hotel. I finally know the Gettysburg heart by heart. But it finally dawned upon me what President Lincoln was trying to say. All of those complex words, I think basically what President Lincoln was saying is that it's not enough to honor those soldiers who gave their lives, who fought to defend the freedom, but it's rather for us, the living, to be dedicated to those causes which they fought and died for. And that cause is freedom. We can't take it for granted. And we have to realize, as President Lincoln said, that this nation can only live on if we have a new birth of freedom, and that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall never perish from the earth. Perhaps we need our President Lincoln from heaven to give us a new birth of freedom so we can come together and remember that very fact. God bless the United States of America. God bless our troops wherever they may be. And we thank any of you who answer the highest call of service to our nation, and also for all families whose loved ones made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. Mark, let's get started. Happy July 4th.
Happy July 4th, and on tomorrow there will actually be a historical event that'll be taking place. They will be doing some events around the home of a very famous gentleman who had some interesting thoughts about the 4th of July. So the historic home of none other than Frederick Douglass will be honored on the 4th of July, and all in that space. And definitely Frederick Douglass had some interesting thoughts at the time of his life about the 4th of July. He had his famous quote, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer a day that reveals to him more than all the other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sound of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impotence, your shout of liberty and equality felt hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parades and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impudence, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. This is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than the people of the United States at this very hour." And that is what he said back in 1852. And I do agree that a lot has changed since that time. And definitely women have been given the right to vote. And a lot of other folks have been given the rights to vote as well, even though some folks are concerned that some of those rights are being attacked as well. But that was what he said on that particular fateful day. And like I said, his historic home in Washington, D.C. will reopen on July 4th, which some people may find ironic, and all along those lines and all in that space. But I did have an interesting conversation of a different note with a friend of mine, and we were actually wondering, and I'm going to bring in Lee Newton Rhodes and see what he thinks about this. But if you'll remember, back in 1976, we had a very big celebration. There's a lot of celebrations because it was the anniversary, the 200th anniversary, the bicentennial, and many of us probably won't be around in 2176, but there is a good chance that some of us, including maybe even doing this pod TV thing, might be around 2 years after the election in 2026, which will be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And my friend was asking, hey, I wonder if they're going to have a big party and a big celebration on that particular day, and all in that space, since that would be a milestone. We'd be talking almost 250,000 years since that fateful day that the Declaration was declared, and all in that space. So what do you think? And I see you graduated high school in 1976 and everything, and I was actually, I think, in junior high at that particular time, since I graduated in 1980, 4 years after that fact. But what is your thoughts about the idea of a big celebration 250 years from now, or 250-year anniversary, which would be in 2026. And I'll also bring in Jacoby and Sasha and see if they've got any thoughts as well.
I think every year's a celebration. I don't know, we don't, nothing's guaranteed in terms of our lives, in terms of the country. It's a blessing it's lasted this long. There were those who doubted it, and I'm not sure, what's going on now with the politics, but every year is a blessing, and I take nothing for granted. And I do believe America is the greatest country that's ever lived in terms of freedoms and liberties for all types of people from all over the world.
I can definitely see that. Jacoby, what are your thoughts about the 4th of July? I know a lot of celebrations will be going on. I was actually celebrating my birthday at the Eno on July 1st and everything, and I might go out tomorrow to the Eno Festival as well, since it is always on the 4th of July and the 1st. And sometimes some of our politicians locally, from definitely Chapel Hill and I think definitely Durham and sometimes even Raleigh, come in and recite some of the stuff that was from the Constitution and a number of other things. And of course, there's great music, great art, and great everything else that goes on during that annual celebration. It is also at a state park and as a celebration of the environment, as they are constantly getting new acreage and all in that space. And I know the ballpark does a big thing for 4th of July as well. I think you told me that the Bulls have a game on that day and there'll be the fireworks afterwards. But what are your thoughts about the 4th of July, since Steve went in that direction? I can't hear you. You're doing something with your OBS.
Yeah.
Can't hear you now.
Sorry. I think it's, well, even a few minutes. And the other issue we didn't talk about, while we have Sasha start here, probably tomorrow or Wednesday, we'll talk about Prigozhin and whether Putin's in trouble, because I've been hearing talk that this is a blow to Putin, at least at the point of view of unchum. July 4th is an interesting time. We've had a lot of challenges in America, but we've had a lot of really great things to do. And, I think that it's a time to reflect and to get back to basics of the things that we should accept that's great about our nation and areas where we can improve and get better. And, I think that it's getting harder to do that with the political environment that we live in, but I think it's important for even us to remind ourselves of things about the United States of America that are great and good. And so that's all I have to say about that. And hopefully, we can.
I heard background noise. I heard background noise. So that means maybe Jacoby is
things in our country that are good, the things that we need to get better, and how do we? Yeah. All right.
Jacoby?
I think Steve froze near the end, but I agree. I agree with what Steve said. I mean, it's a celebration and a time to recognize ways to work together, to come back together again. I mean, that's what we should be doing in the first place, but we seem to, due to our political discourse and our disagreements and angst towards government and just a whole plethora of things. The Independence Day should be a day of celebration, and it is. And it's a good day to reflect and try and think of ways that we really should be coming together and less ways that we're separating ourselves. I mean, stop demonizing each other for one.
Yeah, definitely agree with that and everything. Sasha, did you have any thoughts as a person there in Canada about the 4th of July, which ironically, I think Canada celebrated its Independence Day actually on my birthday, because if I remember correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, July 1st is Canadian Independence Day and all in that space. But any thoughts about Canadian Independence Day and also American Independence Day? But I am correct in thinking that it is July 1st, right?
Well, there's a difference. In Canada, it calls Canada Day. It's a celebration of Canada as a country. Now, in the United States, it's Independence Day. Independence from whom, from what? Nobody knows. And nevertheless, I would like to congratulate all our American friends with the Independence Day.
Appreciate it. Any thoughts, Nick? You're over there. I see you popped in as well and everything. So that'll be on tomorrow, July 4th. And who knows, maybe you're going off to a picnic, because unfortunately, one of the things that happens with all our holidays, I would even argue some of the newer holidays, is that they become more about commercialism than they become about the actual holiday itself and the narration of the holiday. Because I do know a lot of times there are sales, there are a number of things that are going on. I think a lot of people have been buying a whole lot of fireworks, because I know I heard a bunch of them on July 1st, and you don't always have to go like you used to do to another state to get them. So they might have been easier accessible, because like I said, on July 1st in the evening, there was a whole heap of them going off during that night. I didn't hear any last night, but I'll probably hear some definitely on tonight, the 3rd, and there's no doubt there'll be plenty of them on the 4th, because they're not just the official ones that are done by the pyrotechnics that are the experts in that field, but they're also the ones that folks just buy and shoot off on a regular basis.
Mark, that's an example of, we have 50 states, because in 50 states, some states fireworks are legal, other states they're not. Each state makes its own law. There's no federal mandate to make fireworks illegal. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, like I said, it could be an interesting situation, because Jacoby can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that there was a time that you couldn't get certain kinds of fireworks here in North Carolina. So you would go to, I believe it was South Carolina and maybe Virginia, but you would go to an adjacent state to get those fireworks, because some of those fireworks were a little bit more dazzling and maybe even a little bit more dangerous in one sense or another. So they didn't like them here in North Carolina. But as I kind of iterated and everything, I think that they have loosened up those rules so you can actually get them here in North Carolina. And I think there are tons of stands around that are selling said fireworks and everything. But am I correct in thinking, Jacoby, that there was a time that you literally had to drive down to South Carolina to get a certain type of fireworks?
Yep, that's correct. That's what made south of the border actually super big, because people would go south of the border, and they built that whole I guess amusement area right off of 95.
Yeah, that was pretty big. Well, just to help out my Canadian friend, what we're celebrating, in case he doesn't know, is the United States separation from Great Britain back in 1776, Sasha. So
What kind of separation are you talking about? You just refused to pay taxes.
It's not if it was that simple. But see, they also forced their military into our homes, and they also were giving us no representation in London, and it just irritated the bejeebers out of the people that were over here enough to say enough is enough, and we decided to remove ourselves from Great Britain. We even tried to come on our side, but they were loyalists, and so they didn't do anything. Now, for the people around the world, I'm not sure if they really care about this stuff. We have a lot of viewers in Brazil. Don't ask me why. They still rank number 2 in our viewership. But I don't know if they even really care about some of the issues that we have over here. The Supreme Court this week or last week had some really interesting issues. I don't know if you followed what happened. Some you may agree with, some you may disagree with, but there was a big one on the student loans, which we're going to go over with David Walker. And we're
going to have a whole.
We're going to do.
Yeah, I know. I think we're going to have a whole separate show on the whole Supreme Court, because it's been one heck of a year with student relief, and then before that, Roe v. Wade, and then I think it's just
they also eliminated affirmative
making a lot of significant changes. I have to leave early. I'm going to try to jump.
I don't know if you saw the case, how they eliminated affirmative action.
Yeah. We're going to return on Wednesday for our show. But yeah, if Sasha, could you talk about Prigozhin really quickly, and then I'm going to have to run. I'm going to try to call in on the car to continue this conversation. But real quickly about what's going on in Russia.
Very quickly, Prigozhin is a very successful businessman with very profitable businesses elsewhere, including Africa, at least 5 countries, Russia. And there were apparently some agreements between him and Putin. So essentially, Putin, which was completely illegal, he provided and paid for all activities of this private unit, Wagner, which is by itself illegal. So Putin paid from the state for existence and functions of illegal organization. That's a very short thing, but there were financial disagreements between Prigozhin and Putin. But Prigozhin did one very unexpected thing. He said that there is no way that Russia should have attacked Ukraine in the first place. Okay, now he says, well, the war is on. We have to maybe try to win this war or stop this war. It doesn't matter what we're going to try, but in the first place, it was 100% wrong decision to start this war. So this is a huge problem for Putin, who was almost single-handedly started this war. And now where you see where Russia is today, economically, financially, military-wise, and it's a country in disarray. There's not even sure that one of the reasons why Putin is not rushing to use tactical or any other nuclear weapons is he's not convinced that the army will obey his orders. It's quite possible that they will not, because they don't want to risk their lives, their own, the families, their kids. They'd rather kill this criminal rather than put country and his their own
Yeah.
people
Well,
in
we're
such
going
a
to talk.
danger.
It is a significant development. Well, I'm going to call back from the car, guys, but it is a significant development that Putin's power is being threatened. So I think I'll be back either Wednesday or later today from the car. I got to head to downtown Raleigh. Thank you all so much. Happy July 4th to everybody, and we'll continue our conversation. Nick, are we returning on the 5th or tomorrow? 5th, right?
Well, I don't. Oh,
We
we're
will have
definitely
a show on the 4th as well.
Mark's
Because I
wrong.
think that if I remember correctly, and you can correct me if I'm
Oh, okay.
wrong and everything,
Right.
but Sasha is doing his Ukrainian show, which is right before the
Yeah,
news.
right. Because they don't care about. See, the problem is, Steve, around the world, they don't really care about the 4th
Okay.
of July.
All right, we'll move that tomorrow. And then also, I got to brief everyone about my India trip. Modi, the prime minister whom I met at India in the White House and the Congress and the Kennedy Center with John Chambers. It was a wonderful week. We could talk about that and what I learned from the prime minister's visit to Washington on a state visit. Thank you all so much. Talk to you soon. See you
All
guys
right, we'll talk to you.
tomorrow
We'll talk to you soon and everything. Hey,
or Wednesday.
actually, Nick, Steve brought up a good point, and I don't know if you're going to explore it. Now I'm going to bring up something that is a independence-oriented issue as well, because you mentioned taxation without representation. But are we going to do at some point a monthly or one of our other specials with Professor Pratt and the whole notion of what is going on in the Supreme Court? And if so, do you know whether that's going to be in July or August? That was my quick question.
Yeah, it'll be up to Professor Pratt, but we'll do another Supreme Court review now that these cases have come out. I'm just starting to read through them because the affirmative action one was very interesting because Justice Roberts goes, well, we don't, the court's colorblind. Okay, so we're not going to determine race. Then he put in a footnote, except in the military, all right, where affirmative action will still stand. Okay, I'm not going to say that that's an inconsistent statement, but to me, that sounds like an inconsistent statement. If you're going to be consistent, then you just say, okay, we're just going to be colorblind. But you can't say we're just going to be colorblind because that's who we are, and then change and then put a footnote saying, well, except in the military. So I found that case to be kind of amusing.
Nick, is there any reason given for that? Any rationale?
No, they didn't give any real reason for it. It was just what the theory was that, like, if you're applying, it was mainly Harvard and UNC, University of North Carolina, where the defendants are in the case was basically they were using race as a tool, in other words, a factor in bringing students in or not bringing in. Another thing that was, and Stephen Smith, who's a commentator on ESPN, pointed out correctly, Justice Thomas, who serves on the court, who's a black guy who wrote an opinion against me 9-0, so I got swacked by him one time at the U.S. Supreme Court. He goes, Thomas voted in favor of against being affirmative action. And then Steve Smith goes, he is a product of affirmative action. In other words, he got his entry into Yale Law School because of affirmative action. He got his entry into EOC because of affirmative action. He gets on the Supreme Court, so now he finally made it to the top, and he goes, but no one else is allowed in. So he reversed his whole thing that got him into the Supreme Court. So I think that was.
But Nick,
The crazy part about it, did you hear what he said about affirmative action when he was going through the whole court system? Was he ranted and raved? I don't know where I would be without affirmative action.
Yeah, that may be what he said, Jacoby.
Yeah,
but
it's just
when he wrote what he decided was majority against affirmative action.
Hey, Jacoby and Nick, but isn't that that's not that uncommon? Because I can tell you that even from my own personal experience, and this was from decades ago, that sometimes if people get in a position of power as the sole representation of that position of power, they like being there, and they are not always encouraging of others that come into that environment. I know that the one daily newspaper that I worked for, ironically in Florida and everything, that was the case. There was a gentleman there that was a editor. He wasn't the publisher, but he was a high up editor, and myself and a Latin woman and others that were there, and I wasn't there that long. We were constantly getting for lack of a better term, kind of harassed and everything, because like I said, he liked being the big fish in the small pond and everything. So sometimes if people get some benefit from the affirmative action, they are not always supportive of their own, and now don't always encourage their own either, because that is what I ran into way back in like the late 80s and early 90s, but it is still very common even to this day and everything.
Yeah. Well, I'm just pointing out the inconsistent statements by two of our justices. In other words, what they're saying and doing are inconsistent. It would be nice if they were consistent. In other words, had a policy that was consistent, and then at least where they stood on these issues. Another thing that was in the student loan issue, which was quite interesting. I read the majority opinion, which said student loans, forgiveness, forget it. Okay, so forgiveness, forget it. And then, but they had a big issue on standing. Now, what standing is, if you're going to sue somebody, you have to have a harm done to you. Okay, in other words, you can't. I just got hit by an automobile, and Lee Newton Rhodes can't sue on behalf of my injury. I have to sue on behalf of my injury. The interesting part of this case, this is Biden versus Nebraska, is that the states, Missouri, Nebraska, and all these states that sued, really have no standing. And what happened is the court, Justice Roberts, reached over and said, well, Missouri created a corporation to service student loans, and hence Missouri has standing. Well, there's precedent that goes back hundreds of years that say you can't do that. You can't bring standing in because somebody else that you're related party to may have had standing. So Justice Kagan, who wrote the dissent, was probably technically correct that case should have been bounced out of court because of standing. All right. Now, the other issue deals whether or not because of the way the act is structured, whether or not the secretary has the right to waive student loans. And there's some wording that does say that they're allowed to do it. But their definition of waiving wasn't a blanket waiver. And so their Roberts could probably be correct. In other words, you just can't do a blanket waiver. You have to have specific facts before you do a waiver. But here's the other problem with that. Okay, the cost is $430 billion. People don't. It's like we're mindless when it comes to money in the United States. $430 billion, which would be transferred from the borrower to the people on this show. In other words, Lee, get your checkbook out ready. You're going to write a check to John Jones, who just got forgiven $300,000 in medical school debt. So he can be a doctor. By the way, this is a true story. A doctor did get forgiven $365,000 in medical debt. Now he's a medical doctor. Goes, my life's going to be a lot easier. I'm a radiologist, and I work with radiologists. He's right. His life is easier. They make $300,000 a year at least. So Lee, Jacoby, not you.
Nick, when did that happen? What year was that? And have the laws been changed?
This law has been in effect. There was a HEROES Act in 2003 and another one in 2005 that gave them the right to waive student loans, but only under certain circumstances. But this blanket waiver would cost everybody sitting here except Sasha thousands of dollars a year to pay off the student loans of other borrowers. Now, from their standpoint, they go, hey, my life is easier now because my loans were paid off. Okay. From our standpoint, we're going to pay for it. Now, you may not pay for it directly because remember, the government borrows the money. For the government to pay this debt, we got to borrow the money and pay interest on it. But you will pay indirectly because watch inflation grow. So either way, no matter how you look at it, the student loan debt will be paid by other people other than the person who borrowed the money. But
just to touch on that, you said 400 billion was
30 billion.
400.
Jack.
But it's always interesting that we jump to the money aspect in that way, and also I'll get to the other part that I wanted to tell that I found interesting about the courts. But in terms of the money aspect, the PPP loans was 800 billion, and no complaint.
Yeah, but remember those PPP loans are being paid back.
No, there are billions of dollars that have not been paid back.
That's correct.
And there's no complaint.
They haven't been paid back yet, but we have.
No, they're waiving a lot of them, Nick. Nick, Jacoby's correct.
We're paying on our PPP loan, which is more than $250,000 right now.
Nick,
we're paying interest on our PPP
Nick,
loan.
you're saying yourself or your business.
My business
but you're not saying that in general, there are billions of dollars that are not going to be paid back.
Yeah. It's quite possible that is true.
It's not quite possible. It is true.
It is true. You're right. And you know what, Jacoby?
Nick,
what
I'm saying,
wrong.
Nick, what I'm saying is, listen to what I'm saying. And it's the same thing that happened with Ocean's Gate and the people that died on the boat, the 700 people that died on the boat. The rich people that got the PPP loans that are not paying them back at all and got them forgiven, billions of dollars. No complaint. The students that are just trying to make it, trying to have it paid back, that is getting complained about.
Toby, there's a big difference.
There's not.
There's a big difference. With the PPP loans, businesses were shut down by the government. Student loans, people voluntarily took them out.
There are predatory lenders. There are ways.
I don't disagree with you with that. I agree with you, but they were adults who took them out.
Lee, there were adults who took out the PPP loans and did not pay them back. So again, we're having the same argument about, hey, these guys over here, we're not going to worry about. Hey, the government shut them down or whatever. We're going to make some excuse for them to have an excuse. But over here, with the individuals that don't have much money, we're going to forget and attack because they're taking our money. They're adults. They're taking our money. It's the same thing with Ocean's Gate. We sent how many people, how many entities to go after Ocean's Gate with 5 people? How many entities went after the 700 on the sinking ship that we knew where it was? None. We let that ship sink. We didn't say anything about it. But these 5 individuals in a capsule, they signed a waiver for that they paid $250,000 to be on. They chose to be there. These individuals didn't. They didn't have money. They're struggling. We care so much about these 5 people, but don't care about these 700. So just as an analogy, in the same situation, the businesses, yeah, they got to have this money. They've got to have this. Woo! We're going to, toss them this money in this corporate welfare. But hey, I can't, we got to fight over this $5 this man got a loan on, and he ain't paying it back because he can't find a job or an opportunity. So we're going to go to court, go to Supreme Court, to the Supreme Court to get this fight against. And just as you said, Nick, in a standing where they didn't even have standing.
That I think is it. I think
No, I
that
see what y'all are saying. Hey, Jacoby and Nick, really quickly, because I wanted to backtrack on something that we were talking about on one of these Supreme Court cases, that being affirmative action. And I think, Nick, you said that part of their ruling was a notion of this idea of a colorblind society, which sounds idealistic and sounds very unattainable at this moment and everything. So exactly what is a colorblind society, and can you have a colorblind society when there are injustices that are taking place that are based on racial issues? I think of prisons, I think of housing, I think of banking. I can name some few others as well that are having some definite issues around race and everything. So how can you have a colorblind society until you address those issues? That's just my question.
you'll have to ask Justice Roberts, who's inconsistent on his position. Like I said, if you looked at his court case, he goes, Justice Roberts is always, remember, these people went to two schools, Harvard and Yale. Okay, that's it. Except one, Amy Coney Barrett, went to Notre Dame. Okay, so to get on the Supreme Court, you have to go to two law schools, Harvard or Yale. So it's elitist to begin with. And then when you come from that society, Mark, it's almost like, well, everything's colorblind because that's what I was taught, that everything's supposed to be colorblind. Then when he gets on the Supreme Court, he goes, everything's colorblind except the military, because he saw statistics that showed the military officers relative to the enlisted people, the statistics don't correlate in terms of the amount of Black enrollment in the military and the ones that are in officer positions. It's really lopsided. So he said, well, we're colorblind in admissions, but not in the military. And, go figure. But the real problem that what you'll see they'll create will be lack of diversity in some of these institutions, which in my humble opinion, if you can avoid them, you should avoid them anyway, because they don't do any justice to the people that go to them. And I'm talking about the Ivy League. In other words,
you're talking about the Ivy Leagues, but one of the other things that we missed as a news
Ivy League is a waste of money and a waste of time.
Okay. But one of the other things we missed, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about the Ivy League.
I go, please don't waste your money and please don't waste your time. Go somewhere.
No, but speaking of wasting money and time, one of the things that we missed last week, and I just stumbled across this recently, and I'd love to hear Sasha's thoughts about this. But we also, as we were celebrating the 4th of July, one of the things that one of you brought up was, I think it was you, Nick, was taxation without representation. And that is part of the argument around statehood for Puerto Rico and statehood for DC and all in that space. And apparently back in the latter part of June at the United Nations, that organization that apparently doesn't do a lot, there was a special committee on decolonization. So there was some folks there that were speaking about Puerto Rico, and actually Adrian Gonzalez, who is with the Puerto Rican Independence Party, said that the political, economic, and social model of colonialism in Puerto Rico has not only failed dismally, but every day it is rejected by more Puerto Ricans. So he was one of 50 people who addressed the committee during the annual hearing on the status of Puerto Rico, which has been a U.S. colony for 125 years. So one, does these kind of hearings make any sort of difference? And two, will we ever see the 51st and the 52nd state, maybe even a 53rd if Guam or somebody else decides to jump into the fray? But will Puerto Rico and DC ever become states?
Puerto Rico keeps voting against it. They don't want to be a state. They like their status as a commonwealth. But Puerto Rico has some very interesting internal problems. So the answer is, I don't know if you're ever going to see them vote to become a state of the United States. Then the United States have to accept them. I think that's far off right now. But getting to Jatovi's issue about the PPP loans, I think the people that are taking these PPP loans that are not paying them back should be chased down and prosecuted. I am not a fan. And there was one guy I know here in Raleigh-Durham who took $7 million in PPP loans by creating fake companies to get the loans, and now sitting in jail for the next gosh knows how many years. And you can look him up. His name's Tristan Pan. I actually met him in Raleigh one time. And the thing is, the guy was just frauding the PPP loans. And there should be more action taken against these people that have taken PPP loans and not paid them back.
The problem is they were forgiven.
No,
So-
his was not forgiven. And these loans, and this is the bad part of government. I mean, this is just bad government. They should not forgive these loans when these people loan. And this is the reason the government's just got to get out of the loan business.
I mean, I understand what you're saying about chasing down the
loan business. What?
I mean, I understand what you're saying about chasing down the ones that are not paying. But again, these PPP loans, $742 billion was forgiven. So that means they don't have to pay it back.
And
since you can't chase them down or anything.
I'm going to have to go look that up, Jatovi, and see why that hasn't been paid back, because that's a lot of money. You're talking about $700-800 billion not being paid back by.
And that's that's a lot of people that think that they can get away with it, and that's why they haven't paid it back and everything. But speaking of,
that's what I'm saying, is that there was no outrage over that.
But
there is outrage over the student loan forgiveness, and that's less money.
Well, you're right. There should be outrage over that, because
speaking of outrage, there's another topic that is getting a lot of outrage and all in that space, including featuring North Carolina. And it was one of the other items that I was going to bring to the forefront, so I'll bring it to the forefront now. But there are Republican states that are sending people to parts of the world. I think there's another boatload of folks going, I think, from Texas to California. And apparently some folks are getting ready to come to North Carolina. And the North Carolina Republican gubernatorial candidate, Mark Walker, isn't too happy about that, because apparently some unoccupied minors are on their way here, because they're saying that they're going to fly thousands of teenagers into this area and are going to put them in a 100-acre American Hebrew Academy boarding school campus, and there's some concern that might be turned into a global academy. And there's also some thoughts that the folks in the neighborhood don't know about these immigrants that are coming in, and that they would not be approving of them coming in if they knew that they were coming in. But it is a Biden thing that is going on, and apparently he's going to be bringing 800 mostly older teenagers to the area, and there is some concern put out by that particular gubernatorial candidate that they're going to come in, and then starting in August they would be discharged from the academy to adult sponsors around the country, and their beds filled with others who had just come over the border. So apparently it's going to be like a station ground until they get placed in other places and everything. But does he have a legitimate complaint, and what are your thoughts about that? Because when I read that article yesterday, I was going like, So folks are oftentimes having things that are stuck on them and they don't know what is going on. But apparently HHS, the Health and Human Services, has become very secretive about the renaming of the American Hebrew Academy to the Greensboro Piedmont Academy, and they're saying that it could be a temporary influx housing site, and they're wondering how folks are going to be feeling about that in the adjacent neighborhoods and all in that space. So any thoughts about that? Anybody?
That amount of immigration? Well, I think, Mark, what you're going to see is that's a big problem, because there's purportedly like 1 million people at the borders that are attempting to come into the United States. The real question is, can we absorb that many people? In other words, and that's part of the reason why I think, was it DeSantis put them on a bus and sent them to Martha's Vineyard? They sent them to New York, they sent them to California, they sent them to other places, just to highlight the problem of absorption of that many people.
Yeah, I think there is an issue that Canada, it's been declared that Canada needs more and more immigration. and they are trying to figure out how to attract and how to bring more immigrants to Canada. Because Canada just achieved a milestone. It's now 40 million strong population, but they want to increase it much more than that. So why wouldn't the U.S. made a deal with Canada so U.S. would sell all the immigrants that it cannot absorb? It will sell to Canada simply, and Canada will be gladly pay for it.
I don't know. You know, the thing is that's what I'm saying. There's different solutions to immigration, but there's no. Again, we're back to Congress having no consistent policy on.
No, we're also back to money, because what the gentleman Richard Hudson, who is a Republican out of North Carolina, said was that the HHS secretary misled him and others about the housing migrants in North Carolina, and it appears that Greensboro facility will soon be the largest active housing facility for unoccupied minors in the country once it opens in August. And he said that his colleagues and him have been fighting for answers about this facility for months, and this sudden announcement was a blatant stab in the back by the administration. And apparently they're saying the deal, hey, you'll love this, Lee, was made behind closed doors with New York-based deployed resources rather than through the normal public solicitation process, and it is the latest in more than $1 billion worth of backdoor payouts. That's what they're claiming that the Biden administration has made. And I don't know that those payouts have been made or that is that kind of money, but that's what some of these folks from the Republican side are saying.
All quiet on the Western Front on that one.
Yeah, what's a backdoor payout? When it's we the people, there should be total transparency in government. Why are there things called backdoor and off-balance sheet and all these other things to hide stuff from the taxpayer?
It's for the reason you just said, Lee. It's to hide stuff from the taxpayer. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's done so quietly, and even our budget, which is so large, it's a multi-trillion-dollar budget. And Jacoby's talking about corporate welfare. I mean, it's unbelievable how much corporate welfare is out there in the billions of dollars that goes to companies like Intel, Tesla, some of our major corporations that are just getting corporate welfare every day at the trough, and they're being ignored. You know, it's like, hey, it's okay.
I just want to piggyback on something Jacoby said before. Jacoby, I think it's the media. With your story in terms of why we cared about 5 people who voluntarily went on a submersible versus a 7 on a ship, I think that's the media who played one up and played one down. Now, I agree with you. It's horrible. Total misplace of values there.
Well, wait. Time out. On the submersible, there were at least 2 billionaires, maybe 3, out of the 5 people that died.
So we look at pocketbooks. We don't look at lives.
That died. There were no billionaires. They're all workers basically, and they all drowned. And who cares? And that's basically the bottom line. Okay, so let's get real. There were no billionaires on that ship, Jacoby.
I completely agree. But Nick,
people are a dime a dozen. They're on the ship, and they all.
And
no one gives a rat's for it.
That exactly right.
I can get 750 more poor people who died, and who cares about them too?
And again,
all people are created equal, except they're not.
You're right on that. Is that yes? I mean, we care so much about celebrity status. We don't care about, for example, there are the strike that's going on. Well, first, just to jump on that quick standing point that I meant to get back to a long time ago, which was dealing with the Supreme Court decisions, which was about the web designer, which I found interesting.
The web designer.
The web designer wasn't even a web designer, didn't even have a business, but yet took it to the Supreme Court and now says, oh, well, I don't have to service anybody in the LGBTQIA community because of my religious beliefs. Well, I'm sorry, you don't even have a business, and they weren't even asking you to make the website, but yet you win this Supreme Court case, which makes absolutely no sense. That was the whole thing about that case.
That to me was I haven't read that decision yet, but to me that I just saw the squibs. To me, that was the toughest one because I don't know how they justify that.
Yeah.
Because if you're in business like we are in business, and people came to us from the gay community, and we're going to set up a pension plan for them, and then one of our actuaries go, well, I don't work with gay people. Why? Because it's against my religious views. I'm going like, dude, that's not our job. Our job is to set up pension plans for people. We don't give a rat's rear what else they do. In some cases, we don't even care what type of activities they get involved in. You see what I mean? In other words, it's not our job to make personal decisions about people's lifestyle. So I don't know how that case is going to be reconciled over a period of years. In other words, if that case is even going to be able to stand.
And it just didn't. I mean, Nick, how did they get the case to even the court when they didn't even have a business? And they weren't even being asked for the service.
As an individual, I'll have to go look at it takes time to read through all the history of the cases on the Supreme Court website. I haven't read through that case, but that was the one I found the most troubling. I could see the bending of the student loans because they really didn't want to pay $400 billion. Okay, and I can see that. Affirmative action, yeah. Justice Roberts, I could see he was going to go down that path. He stated that before, but that one I didn't see coming because
but I think a lot of people saw that coming just because of the nature of the division that we oftentimes talk about and everything. Hey, Sasha, you'll be glad to know that Canada was in the news for a positive development. It actually comes down to that notion of search and rescue. And I don't know that this woman had a ton of money and everything, but apparently a teenager had been separated from their hiking group in the Canadian wilderness. And after 54 hours and a massive search and rescue effort, they actually found her unharmed except for a few mosquito bites. So apparently they did spend a lot of time there in Canada trying to track down this woman that had been missing for a number of days. So was that getting any news play in the Canadian media? And if so, how was the news play of that story? And was it similar to the Ocean Gate type of rescue? Because it does seem like, from what I read, it looked like it got some play in your area, but you are there. You can tell me better than I can.
Well, listen, I'm not following these developments of rescue operations around the world and including in Canada because they're all very different. They have different goals and different cases. Some of them are successful, some of them are not, as you know. And it's very difficult really to come to any conclusions to this particular case.
Gotcha. Well, like I said, it did seem like it was something that was going on positive, and she was praised for her level-headedness because apparently, some people, if they are out there in that area, and I think it was the British Columbia area that is very wilderness-oriented, you could get very disoriented, but apparently she was keeping her wits. So that is a good thing that was in the news and all along those lines. But on another note, there are some folks that are upset because of Carowinds, because apparently that is a popular amusement park here in the area, and it was shut down days after a crack appeared while people were riding. So it is some hot weather, and sometimes that hot weather can impact things, including some of our equipment, even at popular zones and all of that. So I guess my question for everybody is, will we ever see safety issues addressed in our building? Because I remember running into a gentleman that was building one of the housing complexes here in Durham, and he told me that a good wind burst could take that building down. So I don't know that we are always getting the kind of codes that we should get. But Nick, you're a lawyer and everything. Are we paying enough attention to the building codes, whether that's in an amusement park or in a house? Because like I said, this was a few years back that I ran to the gentleman, and he was like, hey, a good wind might take this building down and everything. And that building, fortunately, is still up, but who knows whether it will ever go down.
Mark, instead of the building, that's the interesting part. Because the codes thing, that's a Nick thing. However, in terms of building material, you heard about Ron DeSantis going to use the radioactive material. He signed a bill to allow radioactive material to be used in the actual roads. So when they're testing it out right now. But yes, their goal was to use a radioactive material. They wanted to use a radioactive material in the asphalt to build new roads in Florida.
Speaking of DeSantis, one of the things I was going to also mention, and I'd love to hear both you and Sasha's thoughts, and we've only got about 5 minutes to go and everything, is DeSantis has said that there are some major institutions that he wants to take out should he be elected president. So he's already said that the IRS would be going bye-bye. I think he said the Department of Energy, there were some other ones that he said would be going bye-bye as well. So one, does he have the legal right to do that if he was elected president? And do we need an IRS and all in that space? Because that's one that he specifically targeted. And I know a lot of folks on both the left and the right, they would love to see the IRS go bye-bye. But is it going to happen? And is he just giving wolf tickets, as the old saying goes?
He's just giving wolf tickets. He's just throwing out red meat. He doesn't have the authority to get rid of any institution. And then on top of that, do we need the IRS? Okay, who's going to pay taxes if we don't have the IRS?
Yeah,
Nick, what's your thoughts?
Happen. He's trying to pander to a base, but if you look at the student loan issue, that's what Biden was doing. He was pandering to a base. In other words, he's just pandering to students. Hey, we're just going to forgive all your student loans, and all of a sudden, oh, then we'll vote for Biden because he's going to forgive all our student loans. You know, and so what happening? He's pandering to a base of people that pay taxes. He's saying, well, we'll just get rid of the IRS. You know. It's just, it just ain't going to happen, Mark. I mean, because the thing is, and they all want to replace it with a consumption tax, which is basically increased sales taxes, which do not affect, it affects poor people disproportionately than it does rich people. So the thing is, he's pandering to a base. He's pandering to his rich constituents. Go, hey, we're going to get rid of the Internal Revenue Service and replace it with a consumption tax. Oh, that's fair. You know, if you really want to replace it with a tax on large homes. You know, I don't know if you've seen it. All you have to do is read the Wall Street Journal on every Friday. They have a mansion section and see the homes that people buy, what wealthy people spend their money on, which are these big mansions. Tax the bejeebers out of that stuff. Create a new property tax on homes that are valued over $2 million.
Speaking of pandering to the base, I was just going to mention a couple of quick news items from around the world as we are wrapping up. But apparently, Israeli forces launched their biggest military operation in West Bank's Jenin since 2012. Violence in India's Manipur state spurred a visit by Modi's rival. And I know that Steve said he's going to be talking about his visit with Modi very shortly. But that is something that was going on over there in India, and definitely the U.S. is recommending that Americans reconsider traveling to China due to arbitrary law enforcement and exit bans and all in that space. And I also saw that in a country that is supposedly usually seen as a peaceful country, that being Sweden, there were some incidences revolving the burning of a Quran and all in that space. And they're also asking what the Swedish entry into NATO will mean, because apparently Sweden has some nice high-tech kind of submarines and all in that space. So they are asking that question as well. But yeah, some folks were wondering about that burning that took place of the Quran in that part of the world as well, because definitely that is seen as a generally neutral kind of country, but there were some protesters that were upset over something and they decided to burn that religious book and all in that space. So it'll be interesting, and we'll maybe talk about some of that on the World Edition on tomorrow and later on in the week as well. And also France is constantly in the news because there's people talking about the deeply entrenched colonial mindset, which cultivates a system of dehumanization and domination, according to some folks as well. So maybe we'll bring some people in from France and see what they've got to say about that characterization of their life and all in that space.
Well, the big thing that's going on, what is it? Is that in France where right now there's the protests?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the what was it started? There was someone shot, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. It was a youngster who was apparently from Algeria, and some people are claiming that a jihad was being declared, even though I did not necessarily see that. And actually, the grandmother was actually saying that she was encouraging people to be peaceful in their protests, and apparently the protests are starting to weathered down or watered down and all in that space, but I did not see anything in that space. And I'd never known Algeria to be part of some of the militant groups within the Middle East. I'm not saying there aren't militants there, but they have historically been more, they're kind of like Morocco. They've been more of a tourism destination and not as bad as some other parts of the Middle East, from my understanding. But I have yet to visit the Middle East, so that's just from secondhand observations.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
I guess we're down to the final few seconds, Mark. It's on you now.
Yeah, it's on me. So we're going to get on out of here. We got the economic show and all in that space. I'm going to hit the intro, outro, and get us on out of here. Don't know. Maybe Sasha will be joining the economic show. I may pop in there as well. I do know that David Walker will be coming over there, and then we'll have the media show at noon. So we still got some more shows coming your way, including the All Around show at 6 o'clock, where Dr. Anthony will be talking about education and other things around the world as well. But right now, we're going to get on out of here. And don't forget that on tomorrow, we've got the Tuesday edition of Ukraine, Russia, and China. And Sasha will be getting with us some great insights. I hope Ivan's able to join us, because I do know that Kyiv has been under constant attack. So he's been kind of trying to stay safe, which I definitely appreciate, and all along those lines.
Mark, as long as you send me the links, okay?
Yes.
Thank
Mark, on a happy, interesting note, I guess to close the show.
Yes.
There was another orca attack on a yacht.
Oh, wow. The orcas are coming after us. What can you say? They don't like those yachts and everything.
Hey, we got the orca and the AI. It's coming.
It's covered. And the zombies will probably be following.
Yep.
Cool. Let's get on out of here.